How do you respond to the argument that holding trials in a civilian court will give detainees that public forum, and you really have already spoken to that. If you have anything else to add on that's been a really major criticism, not only protecting the outbursts, but also the security aspects of trying in an Article III court.
Well, I mean, as I said, there are Article III judges who are familiar with disruptive defendants, not only in a terrorism context, but in other cases as well. Article III judges are used to dealing with people like this and know how to deal with them. And as I said, I look back to that very recent case that concluded, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago in New York, and how the defendant there, I think, was appropriately treated given the way in which she conducted herself during her trial.
What about the concern members of Congress represent communities, and they're concerned about the disruption to the communities and even the safety of the courts holding such trials in local communities? Can you speak to that?
Well, I can understand how people would ask those questions, and I think my answer to that would be to look at history and look at the way in which these cases have been conducted safely, without incident, to neighborhoods and communities that surround the courthouses where these cases have been held. We tried Mr. Massawi in the Eastern District of Virginia, just across the river. I guess in Mr. Moran's district, I guess then, well, close to Mr. Wolf's district. We have tried cases of this nature in all parts of all parts of our country, always without incident, because of the experience that we have, the training that our Marshal Service goes through, the work that they do with their state and local partners to prepare for these trials. Sometimes involves the closing of streets and sometimes causes disruptions, but at the end of the day, these cases have always been held in a safe manner.
Yeah. Finally, Attorney General Holder, there is the concern, or the argument at least made, that holding trials in civilian courts somehow afford detainees too many rights. As a lawyer, I've always wondered about those arguments, but would like very much to hear you speak to that concern.
Well, I'm really glad you asked me that question, because that's one that tends to get my blood boiling. The notion that a defendant in an Article III court is somehow being treated in an inappropriate, special way, that he's being coddled, is anything but the truth. A person charged with murder, many of these defendants are, these defendants charged with murder are treated just like any other murder defendant would be. The comparison to are they getting more rights than the average American citizen is not an apt one. The question is, are they being treated as murderers would be treated? And the answer to that question is yes. They have the same rights that a Charles Manson would have, any other kind of mass murderer. Those are the comparisons that people should be making when trying to make the determination about how terrorists are being treated, and not compare them to average citizens who create no harm, who have committed no crimes.
Is there any truth to, and I've heard this argument in counter to that concern, that actually military tribunals are the rights of the defendants, many of which come before them are our service personnel, that they're really, the rights are skewed in favor of the defendants in a military commission environment? Is that correct or incorrect?
I'm not sure I'd say that they're skewed toward the defendant. I think that one of the things you do find, though, is that because of the lack of familiarity with these kinds of cases, there's a greater comfort, I think, in the Article III setting to be more, aggressive is the right word, but to be more strict in interacting with defendants than you perhaps see in the military commission setting, which again is not to say that you cannot try successfully and appropriately these matters in military commissions.
Mr. Attorney General, with regard to choosing a specific venue for a civil trial, and you've touched on this a bit, your budget request includes $73 million for the first-year costs of holding the 9/11 perpetrators trial in federal court in the Southern District of New York. Since the time the budget was finalized, you have announced that the final choice of form is still under consideration and could theoretically change. If we accept recent news reports at face value, and you've spoken to this, in fact, it appears possible that the 9/11 trials will ultimately be held in that military setting. When a final determination has been made on a form for these trials, will you submit a budget amendment to reflect any new cost estimates?
Yes, we would. The money that we have sought for the potential trials, I think would probably be appropriate almost regardless of where the trial would be held. If, however, we end up in a venue where the costs are substantially less or less than what is included in our budget, we would come back to this committee and seek to amend.
Another budget, we're concerned about these costs in a lot of different areas, but the other with regard to the prison requirements. And your budget, would any such budget amendment affect your request, which I believe is for $107 million to acquire and renovate the prison at Thompson, Illinois? Would the decision of where to try these inmates and disposition and even where they would be held, is your budget request for the Thompson acquisition and renovation at all contingent or dependent upon these terrorist trials and the ultimate disposition and location of the suspects?
No, not at all. Our budget requests money to acquire two facilities, one in Berlin, New Hampshire, one in Thompson, Illinois. The Bureau of Prisons, the Justice Department, has great interest in acquiring these new facilities at a cost substantially smaller than we would incur if we built these new facilities. And our interest in Thompson exists irrespective of whether or not any people from Guantanamo, any detainees from Guantanamo ever set foot there. That is a place that can be used as I believe, medium maximum security facility, and one that the Bureau of Prisons, the Justice Department, would like to acquire regardless of what happens with regard to the detainees at Guantanamo.
And finally, Mr. Attorney General, is the administration committed to paying for costs that might be imposed on local communities in any given venue? Yes.
I think what I said on the day of the announcement is that the trials of these matters are not local trials. On September the 11th, though the buildings fell in New York, although the Pentagon was hit, and although there was a crash in Pennsylvania, all of this country was impacted. All of this country was affected. And these are truly national trials, and as a result, it seems to me that there should be a national responsibility in paying the bills that these trials would generate. It is unfair that the local communities, wherever these cases might be tried, should bear a disproportionate share for what, in its essence, as I said, are national crimes.
Okay, thank you.